In July 2016, Nintendo announced the NES Classic Edition, a plug-and-play gaming device that connects to your TV with HDMI. It includes 30 of the most popular games released for the original Nintendo Entertainment System. It was met with so much anticipation that when it was released on November 11th, 2016, it sold out everywhere almost immediately. But of course, we couldn't help but wonder how the NES Classic Edition might stack up against the multitude of other methods already available for playing NES games on your HDTV. Not to mention how the emulation would compare to pre-existing virtual console options. So let's take another little trip back to the 8-bit glory days.
Ever since it took the world by storm in 1985, the Nintendo Entertainment System became a defining element of childhood for many kids. Endless days of playing amazing games like The Legend of Zelda, Mega Man, and Super Mario Bros. 3. The NES Classic Edition sets out to recapture that moment in time, shrink it down, and make it easily accessible for gamers of today. Seriously, a fraction of the size. The NES Classic, or NES Mini as some have taken to calling it, carries the iconic look of the original in a much tinier form factor. It's actually kinda cute. It even makes the NES top loader look like a monster. The functional buttons on the front of the machine power on the unit and take you to the built-in game selection menu. Included in the box is a micro USB cable and adapter, an HDMI cable, and one controller. You can power the system by plugging it into the wall or a USB port on your TV. The simple design of HDMI makes the NES Mini primed and ready to hook up just about anywhere with little hassle. The included controller is an exact replica of the original NES controller, but it uses the same plug as the Wii Classic controller. The pad feels great, and the texture is exactly the same as you remember. Due to the advancements in design, the pad and buttons feel decidedly less mushy than the original. A nice little side bonus is that you can connect this controller to a Wii remote and use it for Virtual Console and other games on the Wii and Wii U. Cable shortness is a real issue though. The controller's cable is super short and the included HDMI and power cables equally so. Nintendo might have been banking on nostalgia a bit too much when they assumed that people would want to sit like this instead of this. And parents thought it was bad to sit this close to a 13-inch TV. The NES Classic handles everything using a system on a chip, which is powered by an ARM Cortex-A7 CPU and 256 megabytes of RAM. This offers a totally different experience than the FPGA solutions used in the Retro USB AVS and the Analog NT Mini. An FPGA is an advanced circuit that can be configured for very specific purposes, or simulate pre-existing hardware, such as the NES for example. These systems also allow you to play original cartridges. The NES Classic, on the other hand, uses a Linux-based emulator to play the 30 installed games. Setting up the unit is quick and easy. The first time you power the system on, you'll need to set your language and then you'll be dumped to the main menu with all kinds of great games staring back at you. You can sort through these alphabetically, by number of players, number of times played, by publisher, and release date. Choose which game you want to play first while listening to the catchy menu theme, an art that Nintendo has perfected at this point. After choosing your game, it only takes a split second for it to boot. If you need to return to the main menu for any reason, just hit the reset button on the console. Surely this is another reason that Nintendo designed the Classic to be close to you at all times. However, if you have an original Wii Classic controller, the home button will return you to this screen as well. Each game has 4 slots for a quick save state, a handy feature for the modern gamer who might not have a couple of hours to plow through Mario 3 in one sitting. You gotta be careful though. If you back out to the menu and want to continue the same game, you've got to select the temporary save state. If you just select the game from the main menu again, it'll delete that temp state and send you to the title screen. I've lost progress this way. The top portion of the screen has some basic options, a QR code that you can scan to get a manual, some legal notices, and some basic system options. These include screen burn-in protection, which dims the picture if you leave the system on for too long, an auto shutdown, and a demo that will play if you just leave the system sitting for too long. Finally on this list is the thing that most of you are probably here for, the video options. But before we really dig into that, we feel that it's important to remember that the NES Classic Edition was designed to be a simple plug and play for a more casual gamer. The 30 games it includes range from decent to absolute timeless classics. Regardless of the quality of emulation and visual clarity, we must always remember that this is first and foremost a budget machine. The fact that the package can be had for just $59.99 is an absolute deal. That said, let's get into it.
The NES Classic Edition uses the modern HDMI digital video standard, but the original NES outputs analog video over RF or composite. Now these are pretty poor quality signals, but as we've featured in the RGB200 series, enterprising NES fans have developed methods for getting much better quality out of the original hardware. RGB for the best possible analog connection, which can be used on professional monitors or high-quality video scalers. And pure digital HDMI at 1080p, used by the high-def NES mod and Analog NT. And all of that is to say nothing of the other HDMI NES alternatives that aren't truly running original hardware, like the AVS, NT Mini, or emulator machines. The NES Classic Edition outputs video at a resolution of 720p over HDMI. Most HDTVs these days are 1080p or 4K, so this is a bit less than their native resolution, but most modern displays handle 720p quite nicely. To understand how the NES Classic renders retro games for modern displays, it's important to first think about how the original hardware's analog signals work. The NES outputs a 240p signal, a progressive scan variant of the standard definition 480i. By simply tripling the resolution, 240 times 3, well, there's your 720p, the vertical resolution. But a big difference between analog and digital video is how horizontal lines are drawn, and this is where the NES Mini offers 3 solutions to suit your taste. First up, 4x3 is the system default. Probably because for the average consumer, the option that fills the most screen real estate is the one they want. In this case, that's actually a good thing because this mode intends to maintain the proper CRT television aspect ratio, the way most people would have played the NES. In truth, because the NES Classic trims off junk tile columns from the sides, the result is not quite the accurate aspect, but it's fairly close. The bigger issue is that once you start moving, this mode kind of falls apart. See the crazy shimmer as the background scrolls by? Apologies if now you can't unsee it. Let's go back to how the original NES works. The tricky thing is that pixels don't have to be square in an analog TV system. In the case of the NES, they're actually a little fat, approximately 1.2 times wider than they are tall. This is no problem with the analog video output from a real NES because CRTs and digital video scalers can reconstruct the image at the correct aspect ratio with all pixels at a consistent width. But the NES Classic is all digital, so of course it never generates an analog signal. In the digital realm, screens are made of square pixels, so there's really only 2 ways to deal with non-square pixels. The first is to have hard-edged pixels, but at varying width. The other would be to apply filters like the blurry filter used by the Wii U Virtual Console. It's a trade-off either way. The NES Classic uses the former method, so pixels are not equal width. Some might be 3 pixels wide, others 4 pixels wide. Check out the life bar in Ninja Gaiden, which looks oddly uneven. But the most bothersome part is the shimmer. As objects and backgrounds scroll across the screen, the pixels shrink and stretch. It's more obvious in some games than others, largely depending on how fast the game moves. If you can't stand the shimmer, then Pixel Perfect mode is for you. This turns in consistent square pixels, each scaled exactly 3 times vertically and 3 times horizontally. With clean integer scales like this, smooth scrolling is possible in every direction. Problem solved! If you're used to NES games on PC emulators and the like, then this probably looks perfectly normal to you. But for those who played NES games on their childhood CRT, everything might look much too skinny. Intended circles, for example, may look like ovals. Again, it's a trade-off. Pixel uniformity and smooth scrolling will probably be worth it to most people, but CRT purists might be annoyed. And for them, Nintendo included a CRT filter. This mode displays at the correct wider aspect ratio, but adds a scanline effect and a good bit of horizontal blur. This actually smooths over the non-integer scale and results in smooth scrolling. The uneven edges and crawling rainbow artifacts are actually fairly accurate to how a real NES's composite video looks. Check out how it compares to a real NES on a CRT. Kinda neat, right? I mean, sure, it's ugly, but it's a fun way to simulate how most people saw the NES on their own TVs back in the 80s and 90s. If you're curious how some other NES machines, like the high-def NES and the retro USB AVS, handle the NES's aspect ratio and pixel scaling, check out RGB303 and 305. One final thing to assess with the NES Classic's video quality is its overall color vibrance. This was originally a point of concern for consumers because of how NES games are emulated on the Virtual Console service. Since its inception on the Wii, I've always been annoyed with the way NES games were blurry and colors dark and muted. This problem was further compounded with the Wii U VC. As is probably very obvious by now, these games look a heck of a lot better than on pre-existing console VC options. Whatever reason Nintendo had to make NES games so dark and blurry, they clearly wanted to take a different direction with the NES Classic. The colors feel close to what you'd expect from an original NES running on a CRT, and we guarantee it won't be long before this new official RGB palette is implemented into systems like the AVS, mods like the NES RGB, and of course emulators. But when you look at all these wonderful colors a bit more closely, there seems to be a sort of film grain overlay on the whole screen. We can't really figure out the reason for this effect since digital video should be totally clean. Here, let's apply a sharpening filter to really bring out the noise. You can see just how rampant it is. With the same filter applied to the retro USB AVS, you can see just how pristine the image could be. Even compared to an NES with an analog RGB mod, upscaled through the Framemeister, yeah, the NES Classic Edition is somehow much noisier than analog video. At first it was theorized that this grain was due to the burn-in reduction filter, but turning it off yields the same results. Just what the heck is the reason for this?
What makes the NES Classic Edition such an interesting product in this day and age is that while plug-and-play systems are not uncommon, one created by the original hardware manufacturer is basically unheard of. Because Nintendo are behind the Mini themselves, we hold the standard of emulation to a higher level than we normally would for a device like this. One of the reasons for this is because Nintendo has always prided themselves on the accuracy of emulation on their Virtual Console service. They've obviously played things a bit looser with the NES Mini, so while the games may look better in some ways, they don't necessarily run better. At first glance, everything seems to run just great. Games play at their original speed. Sprite flicker and slowdown is present in the same places as the original. If you haven't revisited these games in 20-some years, you'd be hard-pressed to pick out some stuff that isn't quite right. This is a great way to get that quick nostalgia fix. But if you spent any considerable time with these titles in more recent years, you'll easily start to find some stuff that doesn't seem quite right. I noticed right away some weird hiccups during the screen flash when you first choose a boss in Mega Man 2. At first, I thought this was an emulation issue, but I realized this was probably done on purpose to prevent epileptic seizures. There seems to be some sort of built-in failsafe that forces flashes to work differently from original hardware, but the way it manifests can look rather bizarre at times. If you played retro games on your HDTV, you're probably more than familiar with the concept of input lag. Input lag is a delay between pressing a button and the resulting action appearing on screen. You can minimize the effects of your HDTV on lag by turning off offending features, or by choosing a low latency display. But there can also be input lag inherent to certain game systems as well, particularly in regard to how emulation might be handled. The Retron 5, for example, can be quite laggy. After spending time with the retro USB AVS, which manages both a pure digital signal and no discernible input lag through simulated hardware, I naively expected the same from the NES Classic's emulation. Unfortunately, this isn't the case at all, and lag rears its ugly head quite often, although it seems to be more prevalent in certain games. I'm not sure if it's a placebo effect or what, but I feel like there might be less lag when playing with the system's display mode set to pixel perfect. Regardless, any amount of input lag will make beating Mr. Dream and Punch-Out much more difficult than it already is, if not impossible. Finally, even though it's a subject that's outside of the usual scope of the RGB Masterclass, we feel that it's necessary to address the sound emulation in these games. Some sound effects are way off, to the point where they're distracting. More disturbing than this is the sound effect delay that's present in almost all games. Playback of these effects were off by several frames. This was immediately noticeable to me and I could tell that something was up. But it's also very possible that some people won't ever notice this at all. Can you hear it? Or am I just crazy?
Of course, as soon as people started talking about this so-called NES Mini, we just had to know if it really was an improvement over the Wii U Virtual Console, whether it was worth choosing over more flexible and robust alternatives like the retro USB AVS. And of course, we can't help but wonder what hacks might be possible in the future. Unfortunately, supply turned out to be a serious issue, so we want to thank Wes DeSantis of the Second Opinion Games podcast for helping us secure the unit that we featured in this video. The NES Classic Edition is a brilliant idea that taps into the nostalgia that nearly an entire generation shares for the console that set the standard for gaming going forward. And while it might not do much for those who are still active in the retro gaming scene, it's a wonderful way for Nintendo to invite the world back to a simpler time.